All right, here's the breakdown for the CSSBattle solution for the 28th of April 2026. This was a cool one. It's always nice when you can find a useful property that's for multiple purposes, basically. So in this case, scale gives us the right size for the paragraphs and also resets the stacking context. That all might seem a bit confusing at first, so I think the best way for me to do this is to just go about it like I was going to do this from the get-go. So the first thing always, is to set the background, and then my next thing is I look at these three blocks and I basically see three inline elements with one rotated. That's the image that I see. So we put in an image, and I use an image here because it's the shortest element that has a default display of inline block, which makes it useful for horizontal layouts. So first we need to give this these image tags the right background color, and then we need to give them some size, which we can do with padding. So vertical size 110, horizontal padding 20, some margin for spacing, and then we also need a border. We don't have to define the border color because it's black, and the default color for the border is black, so that's fine. That just works. Right, that's better. Okay, cool. Yeah, so that's kind of what we want. That's the right shape. And then, so a nice trick that we can do here with margin is instead of applying a margin to the HTML or the body and then a margin to the image tags to position them, there is a trick that you can do. As long as the elements that you're applying the margin to are equidistant from each other, you can use a single margin property to position all of them, which is very handy. So I'm going to show you how that works. So first, when you get the right vertical height, which looks like it's about 22, right, bottom does it, so top, right, bottom doesn't matter, and then left, we're not sure yet. Well, yeah, left is 92, that's correct. Great, so that positions our first image tag correctly, but what about the rest? So here's the trick. We set a high left margin, and then we set a negative value for the right margin. And you can kind of see what we're going to do over here. We can, using this, basically just have one margin value to position all of them. We're going to have to bump up this value on the left to position it where we want it to be. But just by playing around with the margin like this, you can get it into the position that you want it to be. Well, get all of them into the position that you want them to be in. Just playing with a single rule. So I'm just going to make this a high value initially. So those other blocks out of the way. Okay, perfect. 392, we still need more space. Oh no, wait, we need less space. That looks right. Okay, perfect. So now we've got our main layout here. And then the next thing is this element, the one in the middle, should be rotated. So what I'm going to do there is I'll use an attribute selector, which is way quicker, way shorter than doing like class something. We can just use an attribute selector. So we just put an X as an unnamed attribute, or just as an attribute, and then we use that in square brackets to target the element. And then all we do is apply a rotate. So that's kind of what we want. The only issue here is the rotate that we're applying to this element resets the stacking context or gives it a new stacking context, which means it sits above all its siblings. We don't want that. One way to reset that is to apply a scale. So now all elements have the same stacking context. The issue now, though, is that this element that's first in the DOM is actually all the way on the right over here because of the margin trick that we're using. So to fix that, one of the ways would be to just do a negative margin on the HTML element. A negative scale on the HTML element, and that'll basically flip it. So then we've got our solution there. That's pretty much the idea behind this. And then the optimizations come in when I see that, so we have a horizontal layout here, but we also already have a rotate property being used. We need that for this middle element. And if a rotate property is being used already, that means we can apply it somewhere else without spending a lot of characters, which means that we can make these images paragraphs instead. This normally wouldn't work for horizontal layout, but if we apply the rotate to the HTML as well, then we can actually turn this normal horizontal stacking of the paragraphs into what appears to be, normal vertical stacking into what appears to be horizontal stacking. Okay, so, and then also because we have paragraphs, we don't have to use padding to set a width and a height, because block level elements initially have, by default have a width of 100%. So all we need to do is set the height to 20. Perfect, that's what we want. And after that, there's some messing around with the margin that you would need to do. So, and now we're not positioning from left to right, we're positioning from top to bottom. So this would probably just be one value, and then one would play around with these to get the positions where you want them. Let's just tweak that so we can get it where we want it to go. So maybe 72 over there. Okay, so top, right, and then for our bottom value, we're going to need to do the negative trick on this one. So let's start by just moving these across. Yeah. So let's increase that, and we can kind of just play around with these values to get the element positioned where we want it to go. Okay. Alright, you can see this just takes a little bit of fiddling, basically. I don't know, there might be a way to do this faster, or like a way that you can actually calculate it. If there is, please let me know, because this is a little tedious, but it does work. Okay, that's close enough. Wait a second. So let's just get this perfect. There we go. Okay, that's what we want. But now we have that issue with these elements being the wrong order, right? And because things are now stacked top to bottom, which means they appear in the same order in the DOM as they do, as they appear to. They're not reversed or anything. We don't need this negative scale on the HTML element. And there we go, we've got our solution. That's already quite a bit shorter. So that's good. And then the next thing I realized was that because we're dealing with paragraphs here, there's more than one way to give them height. And one way to give them height is to put some kind of character in them. You could use a dot, but in this case that alters the diff a bit much. So we're going to use a non-breaking space character that prevents white space collapsing, but still, but doesn't like affect the visual appearance, I suppose. There's no dot or character in the way. So because we've got these characters, that means the paragraphs already have an implicit height. Okay, that implicit height is not exactly what we want. It's about 18 pixels, I think, which is based on 16 pixels height times by like 1.125 line height. That's usually the browser default. So these are 18 pixels high, which you can see here, maybe 18.5 depending on your browser, but it's about that size. So what we can do here is we can use scale to give it the 20 pixels height. And what we do for that, or how I do it, is, so we want 20 pixels and we've got 18. That means we need to apply this scale, basically, and that'll give us the correct size that we want to work with. So great, there's a nice save. We can get rid of the height property. That does mean, however, that because we're applying a scale to this paragraph, that the margin and the border width will be altered. So we want a 10 pixel border, and we're applying this kind of the scale to it, which means we need to set our border width to 9 pixels. So we just make this 9 pixels, and then the next step would be playing with these margin values to get it positioned correctly. That's pretty much what we want. Yeah, that's almost all optimizations. And then the next thing is just removing all these like repeating, like basically seeing how much we can round it down to. I figured out that 3 decimal points was the closest I could get away with. Doing 2 gives us too much of a diff. All right, so there we go. The next thing we can do to optimize here is that we see we've got a selector applying a selector for the middle paragraph and for the HTML element that have a rotation. And then there's another selector for the HTML element that gives it a different background. One way we can get rid of this extra selector is just apply the background to the background to the X element, or to the middle paragraph, as well as the HTML. Issue there though is that because this attribute selector has a higher specificity than the element paragraph selector, it overrides the color that's set over here. But this can easily be solved by removing this closing bracket and instead making the paragraph selector nested within the HTML selector, and this gives it an increased specificity, which lets it override this color that's set a bit higher up. And then the last optimization that we need to do here is to check if this background color has an equivalent, the 6-digit background color has an equivalent 4-digit hex code, basically a 4-digit hex code with 3 color values and 1 alpha value. So I just use a tool to do this. I'll link this in the video description, but basically I come here, we know our background is by default white, we paste in the target color, and this gives us the code of this 4-digit hex code, which is basically CC7722 as the color values, and then CC as the alpha value. And then we can take this and use that as the background. Yeah, that gets us down to 124. Perfect. Yeah, that's it. I hope that was helpful.